Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your board game doctor today. So, I'm going to hit two birds with one stone. You're going to see a solo playthrough of Glass Road on the screen ahead of you as a part of the Rosenberg-athon that I'm trying to do in the month of March, and also talk to you about my favorite 10 buildings in Glass Road. I was looking to make a part two of my strategy iceberg guide, which you can find on Board Game Geek in the strategy form about this game. And I wanted to conclude that with, talking about my favorite buildings and what had worked for me as I worked up to the number one spot on Board Game Arena for Glass Road, both overall all time as well as on the last arena season. Now, I really had a hard time figuring out how I wanted to portray this since so many variables and different contexts give different strengths to certain buildings. And I finally stumbled on a video made by Phoenix, who is a board gamer that strategizes or is heavy on strategy and playing games optimally. He made a video on tier lists, which I was debating on making, and that shed some light on how I wanted to portray this because it's hard to make a tier list in a board game, for example, when you're talking about cards or tiles, etc., when everything is always situated in the context that they are in. Some tiles and cards are better in certain situations, and even though you might not play them as much, it's different than when comparing a tier list in a video game with certain characters, like a fighting game, versus a board game with a lot more variables. So instead of making a tier list of all the buildings, I decided to go with my top 10 favorite buildings. So these are the buildings that I, one, enjoy playing, two, I find that they yielded me a lot of points and a lot of victories when I pursued them and prioritized them. Not These buildings don't always end up being the ones that give me the victory, for example. But when I do see them in the market, I do try to prioritize them and see if they fit in with my plan because I feel like they offer strategies and benefits that typically will benefit you uh, greatly throughout the rest of the game. Uh, and that's another thing too. Some of these buildings won't be the best early in the game or even later in the game. Sometimes it's vice versa, right? And so I'll try to address some of the contexts that you might want to pursue some of these buildings. And of course, as a shout out to some honorable mentions, something that I would put for my collectively number 11 would be endgame buildings that give you 7 points if you maximize the resources. And this includes the slipway for wood, pottery for clay, the water mill for water, the storehouse for food, and coal facility for coal. So 7 points is a lot of endgame points from a single tile. You do have to have the right situation, as in other production buildings or immediate buildings, that you can combo off of for these specific resources at the end of the game, ideally, since you would want to try to use resources throughout the game to buy other buildings and develop your strategy, and then finally uh, ending the game with as many resources as possible using these production buildings or immediate buildings to get to do so. So it can be somewhat difficult to do. I tend to gravitate towards these buildings because they often will be easier to achieve at the end of the game. And if there aren't any other buildings that are as tantalizing as perhaps some of the other buildings that I will mention on this list, these are a great potential option for points. So those are collectively my number 11, my honorable mentions. So let's move to number 10, which is the storage building. I think this is a great deal to get a point and two bricks for its price. I think bricks are easily one of the best resources in this game. I would say more buildings that are worth pursuing usually have a brick cost as far as resources go, and it saves you the trouble of trying to unclog your brick wheel if you're able to build this. And it can, especially in the early game, give you an opportunity to utilize free brick to build better production buildings and better end game buildings that you might be pursuing in the long run for extra points. And so the storage building is a really good building to start off with earlier in the game. And even if you don't use it in the early game, you can build it at the end for 2 brick to get 2 points in addition to the point that it gives you. So it potentially could be 3 points at the end of the game if you do not use the brick and have it left over. So lots of options for this building, and my number 9 building is very similar to that as well, which is the buttery. This not only gets you a point for having the use of upgraded goods, but it also gives you free food on each of your wheels. So food is often a resource very similar to coal, where I just feel like it's hard to find the right buildings or use the right cards that seem efficient enough to unclog your wheel, essentially. And I talk about unclogging your wheels a lot in the strategy iceberg, but it's really important to have the flexibility to have glass and brick available to be produced and to use for certain beneficial buildings. And so the buttery can give you that point, as well as giving a boost on both wheels for food. So you don't have to use a card to do so. It's a really efficient building to progress your game and keep those wheels flexible. Food is really good for certain specialists like the builder, and so you can build this for the potential use of the builder later on to hopefully combo that into 2 more buildings to put onto your tableau. Moving on to number 8 is the Wood Trader. I put this here because it's more of a fun and flexible card. I wouldn't say that it's my most successful card, but I have had really cool games where this has come in handy. And so you generate extra resources of your choosing for each wood that you spend. And so if you are trying to combo, for example, playing the builder, if you combo this into 2 different buildings, you play the Wood Trader first, you have some extra wood lying around, you can utilize that wood to unclog your wheels or gain building resources that you would need to build that second building, for example. And so the Wood Trader is a very high skill type of building. I think you need to prepare ahead of time, of course, to have enough wood, first of all, to build it, and then second of all, enough wood to gather as many resources as you would potentially need. So you do need to think a couple of turns ahead, knowing what you want to spend your wood on. But if you can do that, the Wood Trader can be a very efficient one-time effect that can yield awesome results. Next is the Village Church, number 7. The Village Church is a costly building. It is one of the more lucrative ones, giving you a base level of 4 points. It equals out for the amount of brick and glass as upgraded goods that you would need to pay for it. But, and so you wouldn't get those upgraded resources at the end of the game as leftover points. But if you play your tableau right, you automatically gain a free 8 points, or total, an extra 4 points on top of the base 4 that you get for Village Church. One minor caveat I will mention as well is that the Village Church can be a little disarming when you see it being played on Board Game Arena specifically, because the 4 points aren't automatically added since it's an end of game building. In the physical version, it's printed on the building, and so it's easy to see that an opponent might have 4 points there. But that's not going to be reflected in the progression of points that you see in Board Game Arena. So that aside, the Village Church obviously is a really good building that gives you a lot of points, but I wouldn't say you should overextend yourself to pursue it over, multiple rounds. It's definitely not a building that you want to prioritize in the first round. Once again, you want to prioritize production and immediate buildings to get somewhat of an engine going. And with that engine, if you're able to produce enough of the building resources that you need for this, the wood and the clay, as well as being able to free up your wheel to gain some glass and brick, then I would say this is a building worth pursuing, especially if you are probably going to end up with like 2 brick and 2 glass at the end of the game. Instead of settling for just 4 points, if you have the room on your board, even if it's for like an extra 2 points to make it 6 total, then I think it's worth trading in those leftover resources to build a village church for some extra points there. So it's a fun building to try to uh, accommodate on your tableau. And yeah, it's worth a shot, but it's not always going to be the number one building, and that's why it's higher up on the list. Number 6 is the estate. Now, this building has a lot of potential to give you points, upwards of 8 or 10 points or even more. I've lost games to people who have really maxed out the estate. However, the danger of the estate is that it's very telegraphed in what kind of specialist cards you want to play. So if you build the estate, or if it appears like you're planning to build the estate later on, you know that, if I was your opponent, I would know that you would want to prioritize certain specialists that give you the landscape tiles as well as the cultivator for building. And so if it worked as a part of my strategy to try to take advantage of you playing those cards, and for me to have the free ability to not only block you from using both actions on that specialist card, but for me to gain a free action as well. And if it behooves me to do so for my own strategies, then I can potentially take advantage of the fact that you are playing for the estate, and therefore benefit as well and potentially win. And so I've won plenty of games against people who have invested into the estate. So I caution you when you start pursuing this, but at the same time, uh, if you have the right abilities and the right cards to play a bunch of landscape cards and really maximize the estate, then it could serve you very greatly. And I've won games doing that as well. And so it's a fun card. It's really fun to build out your estate and maximize the amount of points you get for landscapes. And so that's why it's at number 6. Number 5 is going to be Clinker Plant. So this one creates an interesting mission for you to seek out all of the buildings that require brick to build. If you find those buildings and build a ton of them, normally those buildings are worth many points at the end of the game and have great abilities. Not that I've mentioned them here, but some of them, as in the production buildings, they will give you some awesome resource conversion abilities that are useful throughout the game. But the Clinker Plant, if you do end up building this, gives you essentially, a not double the amount, but a payoff for investing in those buildings that have brick as requirements. I try to, hopefully get like 5 or 6 points at least from Clinker Plant. I think that's when it's worth it to build and to pursue other buildings. And of course, if the market is so that there are plenty of brick buildings to build, and as well, if there were buildings that, like production buildings, that give you the opportunity to convert resources into brick, or to gain, clay, charcoal, and food on your brick wheel, or like, for example, the storage. That's a great building that combos well into this, so you can use that brick to build other buildings for the Clinker Plant. So it's a relatively reasonable building to build as well, as you only require 1 glass and some wood and clay to build, and therefore it's an interesting strategy to pursue if you see this in conjunction with the right set of other buildings that require brick in the tableau. Number 4 is the mansion, and this is going to take the place of the other surround the building with landscape endgame buildings, such as the factory and bathhouse for pits and pawns, respectively. I think that the mansion is usually the most relevant and easiest one to build, honestly. The bathhouse is not the most, I guess, conducive to build. It's reasonably priced, but having a lot of pawns on your landscape, on your board, is usually not as effective as having pits and forests, or not forests, but groves. And so I think that the mansion or the factory is hard to build because it requires 3 brick and 4 wood. And so the mansion is usually a little bit easier to build. And having, at least 4 groves on your board really helps yourself to gain extra wood or food throughout the game as well. It pairs really well with other good buildings, such as the Grove Court, which gives you 4 points and the ability to place groves on each empty space surrounding the building. And so, if you see that and the mansion, that's a great combo in and of itself. It's much better than the lowest plateau for the factory, as an example. So, I really like the mansion. I think it's probably the most reasonable to build in terms of resource cost and the efficiency of having groves on your tableau, as well as some other supportive buildings to use groves with. So, and 8 points is nothing to scoff at as well. So that's mansion. Number 3 is the country house. And so this kind of goes well with those landscape surrounding endgame buildings. But this one is also really flexible, and that's why I enjoy it so much. It's a solid 4 points. It gives you the option to build out 2 identical landscapes of your choosing, and you can place them in adjacent spots however you may. And so there's flexibility in where you place them, what you place, and the flexibility is great for creating points with other adjacency buildings or contiguous buildings. For example, the 4x4 buildings, those endgame tiles that give you points, or if you have production buildings that use landscapes to convert into resources, those are great for those as well. And of course, the specialist cards that require landscapes to gain you a lot of resources when played. So lots of flexibility, and a solid 4 points is always great to see in a building. So I love the flexibility and the point gains from the country house, and that's why it's number 3. Number 2 is Mason's Guild. So I really like Mason's Guild because it has probably the highest potential points for a single tile in the game, aside from the estate. So the Mason's Guild, and I guess I should say out of that are reasonable, right? Because I think you could probably do it with the warehouse as well. But anyway, the Mason's Guild rewards you for having leftover brick. It gets you 9 points if you maximize the amount of bricks that you have left over at the end of the game. It's easier to build than its glass counterpart, the Glassworks, and so that's why the Mason's Guild is here. And I just feel like there are more buildings that offer clay as resources to garner, as well as focusing on the clay and coal, or sorry, the food and the charcoal to maximize on this wheel. It's easier to do because there's one less resource compared to the glass wheel, right? And so it's just easier to probably fulfill by the end of the game. Once again, it's harder, like thinking about the clinker plant, it's harder to justify saving a lot of brick earlier on in the game because you want to build buildings that usually require brick to progress your strategies and points. And so the Mason's Guild is awesome when it comes out in like round 3 or 4, and you have a situation where you are able to garner enough resources to have leftover brick. And so I think that is the optimal time to play it. But even if it comes out in round 2 and I don't see anything else that is more beneficial, I tend to try to snag the Mason's Guild because I know I can set myself up trying to use some brick to build buildings along the way, but set myself up using other tiles and my specialists to make sure I end up with 3 points or 3 brick at the end of the game to give me 9 points. So It's not terribly difficult to do. It's tempting to use that brick for other things, right? But I think it's usually well worth the 9 points that it gives you at the end of the game. And then, of course, my number one, if you've seen me play or have heard me talk about my favorite buildings before, is the office. So this is my favorite building because of the flexibility that it gives. The ability to use the feudal lord is interesting because the feudal lord, unless you have one of these office type buildings, I feel like is sometimes not as efficient of a card to play. Yes, it does give you the options of private buildings, but if you don't like those private buildings, they are a wasted turn essentially, especially if you're not able to use the feudal lord for one wood and clay. And so it's great to have those options to build, but if you don't, you need buildings like the office to use for other things, right? You've got the other office buildings that give you landscapes or brick, etc. But the office itself trades in one private building for one basic resource of your choice. And so I can play the feudal lord every turn, and even if I don't get both actions, I can still use the 3 private buildings and know that those are options for me, but also 3 random and flexible resources that I can use in the game. It catches people by surprise because people might not predict 100% what you're trying to do and what you're trying to go for and build, and then if you have the office, because you can use those flexible resources and private buildings that you don't need to gain enough resources and combo as a free action right before you build. And that is always very satisfying. And this always leads me to a higher chance of victory when I play this. It's relatively easy to cheap, and it gives you a point as well, or 2 points. And so it's super great to build early in the game. And sometimes even in round 3 or even 4, I will take it for the points, But if you see this in the opening market, prioritize this, please, because I think this building is something that you should center your strategy around. At the very least, it gives you the options to play the feudal lord and to utilize its effect to broaden your horizons and options for building tiles as well as resources. And so I can't think of a better tile in this game than the office. I love to try to use a builder card in the first round, especially if there is a shed or something that gives me sand, whether it's through a building or a specialist card, to gain that one glass that you need to build this card. And so I often try to pick my cards in that first hand accordingly to get that one glass as quickly as possible to build the office. When I do, I feel like I do well most of the time. When I don't get the office early on and my opponent does, I feel like I struggle. So The Office is not only a great show, but The Office is my favorite tile in this set of Glass Road. So thank you for listening or watching this all the way through. Or yeah, if you're reading this as well, thank you for doing so. Let me know what your favorite buildings are. If you have buildings that you feel like garner a better strategy for you overall that I did not mention in this, and obviously, hopefully it's apparent, but this will supplant my Glass Road tier list before I made the trek through the ranks and reached the number 1 rank. So that was way before, and so some of the buildings that I mentioned that I really liked back then, months ago, are not on this list now. And so take heed of that if you do or have happened to watch this or that video, and use this as a guide if you would like, and of course, if you know what you're doing, then I don't know why you're watching this. But anyway, thank you for listening, and hope this helps, and let me know what you think I got right or wrong. Hope you schedule an appointment with me real soon, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.